Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. My name is Jay Shambaugh. I'm co-director of the Institute of International Economic Policy, or IIEP, as we call it, here at GW. We at IIEP are very pleased to be hosting this event on the proposed new farm laws in India as part of our Envisioning India series, and to once again be partnering with our co-sponsor, the Seeger Center for Asian Studies at GW. IIEP is located at the Elliott School at GW here in Washington, D.C., and it is a cross-school interdisciplinary research center at GW. IIEP aims to serve as a catalyst for high-quality, multidisciplinary, nonpartisan research on policy issues ranging from international finance to international trade, to development, to poverty studies, to climate change, to economic policy more broadly. And we've also focused a great deal on issues surrounding China's economy and India's economy. Next week alone, we'll have a Monday morning seminar on multidimensional poverty and a Friday morning conversation on China's outward investment. And the following week, we'll have a conversation on March 10th on India's federal finance, including N.K. Singh, who chaired the 15th Finance Commission. We at IIEP have had a focus on India for over 5 years, including a number of large events on India's economy, and now for the last year or so, this Envisioning India series. I'm going to now turn it over in a moment to Ajay Chhibber. Ajay Chhibber likely needs no introduction in this crowd, but for formality's sake, I will note that he is an IIEP Distinguished Visiting Scholar and has played a leading role in coordinating our work on India, including organizing this Envisioning India series. Prior to his time with us, he had many positions. I could fill up the whole time with them. I'll just note he had many positions at the World Bank, the UN, and within India. I want to extend a special welcome to our panelists, including Kaushik Basu, for whom it is a welcome back to IIEP. He co-taught a course with my co-director here at IIEP, James Foster, back when he was a chief economist at the World Bank. So without further ado, welcome virtually to Washington, D.C., and to GW, and a special welcome to all our students who are with us either nearby in Foggy Bottom or around the world right now. With that, Ajay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jay. Well, the topic itself hardly needs any introduction. The farm laws have generated probably the biggest protests India has seen since independence. And it is amazing that it's an issue which has been discussed and debated in India for a very long time, and even more surprising because very drastic policies like demonetization and the lockdown during the pandemic, when millions of people had to go back to the cities without any help, generated very little protest. So what is amazing is how much protest this particular issue has generated. There's so much has been written about it. I mean, I myself wrote a paper for IFPRI almost 40 years ago when I was still a graduate student at Stanford with Professor Raj Krishna on this subject. And of course, an enormous amount of stuff has been written on it, including by some of our very distinguished panelists. Let me just say that I can put broadly the views on this subject in 3 buckets. One is a group of people who feel that the laws themselves are incorrect, misplaced, harmful. Then there's another group of people who feel that the laws themselves are not wrong. It's the way that they were introduced, and that's where the problem lies. And then there's a third bucket of people who feel that the laws are fine, but then there's a lot of vested interests that have used these laws to generate protests. So roughly, I would say there are these 3 broad buckets in which I can see a lot of the writing and the protest taking place on this issue. But today we have a very distinguished panel that will elucidate on these. Let me start by introducing Sudha Narayanan, who's at IFPRI. She's a rising star on agricultural economics, and she's just moved to IFPRI, and so we will have her join this panel. We have also Professor Mahendra Dev. He's the Vice Chancellor of IGIDR, which is a very prestigious university and formerly an institute of the RBI. And he has, more importantly, also been Vice Chair of the board of IFPRI. He's written a lot on this subject. And he has been the chair of the Bureau of Costs and Prices, which formulates and prescribes minimum support prices and other agriculture prices. So he has had very practical experience. And by no means last but by no means the least is I would consider Kaushik India's best international economist. He has that very rare, he's that very rare breed of persons who can teach game theory, but also give very practical policy advice. He has been India's chief economic advisor. He has also been the chief economist of the World Bank, and has tremendous international knowledge, expertise, and prominence. So with this great panel, I think we are in for a treat. Let me start by requesting Kaushik to begin. We'll give each of the panelists 15 minutes to start, and then we'll have a second round after that. But I turn it back to you, Jay, now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And so with that, why don't we turn it over first to Kaushik to give his 15 minutes, and then we'll move through each of the panelists before a shorter second round of follow-ups.
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you, Ajay, for the very generous introduction. I should tell you that these are all friends I'm meeting after a long time, but the earliest friend in this is Ajay. We go back to our college days, residence. Wonderful to see you. We are debating an extremely important topic, a topic that has got India charged. One awkwardness in my participation of this debate is the two other panelists are my primary source of information. I read Mahendra Dev and Sudha Narayanan for their expertise in the field. So a lot of my information is information that comes from them. But I want to join in the argument. I'm not even completely sure whether they'll be on my side or the other side. And probably, like all good economists, there will be nuanced differences. Ajay did a very nice classification of people's attitudes towards these laws. Let me tell you my own. When I first saw the law, when the laws were enacted in September last year, skimmingly, like you do with so much information coming all over, I actually felt it's a move in the right direction. That these are laws that ought to be supported, but I had not read in any great detail. The awareness became when this became a hotter political topic and the farmers were beginning to protest. I thought that, once upon a time, I used to be mired in these kinds of topics, working in great detail. I better read the laws, better read the material and understand what's happening. When I did so, I have to say, my sympathies were with the farmers entirely. And I feel in an uncanny way, they had picked up the flaws in the law better than many other economists. And I felt that, yes, they were not always articulating their position absolutely right, but the spirit in which they were opposing the law was the right spirit. And strictly, these laws ought to be repealed, is my view. And you need to get back to the drafting table. Indian labor laws need change, as the agricultural laws need changing. That is also true of labor laws, but agricultural laws need changing, and you need to get back to it. Let me now explain why I came to take this position. For this, I have to explain also Let the details of the law, I'm very quickly just giving you. There are three parts to it. There are three laws. One basically relaxes the buying and selling of agricultural products. Earlier, in many states in India, not all states, in many states in India, there was a law that if the farmer is trying to sell the product in a city or a town, they have to sell it only through the mandi. This is called the Apmc Act, that you can't just sell it to anyone on the street, you have to sell it through the mandi. So this was being opened up, you can sell to anyone, which broadly seems like a right move. The second one is, second or third, depending on how you're saying, is allowing for contract farming. That you can sign up contracts and the farmers produce these large amounts and you're contract bound with the person with whom you signed the contract, this person buys up. And we know from around the world that for big agriculture and global exports, etc., contract farming is important. So again, seems broadly right. The third one is a change which is a bit more mysterious, that allowing stocking. In India, we have a rather severe law, the Essential Commodities Act, which prevents people from stocking up on large amounts of food grain and other food items. The original spirit of this law was you don't want to encourage speculation in food. People buying up food and almost like in stock markets, allow prices to go up because you bought up a lot, you stocked it up. When prices go up, you sell the food and make profit. The idea was to stop this, so we have the Essential Commodities Act. I think that was too stringent the way it was earlier, but the easing up over here does put an antenna up. You're suddenly allowing people to stock up on food grain. Why are you doing this? But broadly, it seems to be move in the right direction. What's the concern? The concern is, let me go to since this is an economics panel, the gist of the economics argument. That at one level, it seems you're giving farmers greater freedom to sell. And the response that I'm getting is, how can that hurt anyone if you give them greater freedom to sell? The point is, when you give people greater freedom to sell, I can sell to anyone at any price. Each such move is indeed beneficial, barring some rare cases of individual irrationality. Giving people that space means they are going to do better. But there is an important other things remaining constant condition. And for this, I'll have to explain another feature. And since you've given me the floor to go first, let me do the explanation of another part of India's agricultural product marketing. Is in India, we have the minimum support price, which is announced by the government, usually twice a year. And at that price, the farmers are free to sell the product to the government. The minimum support price system has many flaws. It is important, but it has many flaws. Among the flaws, I'll just to quickly mention, the minimum support price is usually set at a reasonable price and people do want to sell there. But the way the government handles the problem of oversupply is, in many parts of India, you don't have the window for collecting the food grain. So you can announce a price, but if you don't have a window for collection, in many parts of India, it becomes notional, the price for the farmer, so you actually don't manage to sell. Number two, the minimum support price system is not backed by any law. So it is possible for you to dismantle it, and dismantling it, you don't even have to announce. If you set the minimum support price so low that the government says, we will buy the food grain from you at a very low price, no one will sell to you. So when you are giving people greater freedom, even if in itself that increases welfare, if simultaneously, if you begin to dismantle the minimum support price system, it's not clear that the farmers will be better off in the end. And on the minimum support price, one more thing I should tell you, the bulk of it is directed to rice and wheat. I personally feel it should be low minimum support price for other products as well, so that farmers diversify, and you should run it all India much more efficiently. So there were things to be done on that front. But now, come back again to the new laws that have been brought in. The fear that people have expressed is, when you open up and give farmers this greater space to sell, and you're trying to create an all India market, you're also giving a huge amount of space for the big buyers, the big traders, big corporations to come into the space, have huge granaries where you can stock up because there is no law that prevents you. And there was another thing in the fine print of the new laws, that the farmers can't take their grievances to the courts. They have to take it to the district magistrate. So these were all telltale signs that were getting us worried, that in the end, what's going to happen is, yes, you have given farmers greater space, but into that space, you've got, say, 5 big corporations buying food grain. You are going to have a lopsided market. Even the bastion of free market, United States, every time there is a talk of opening up and creating more market space, one simultaneous discussion that takes place is about antitrust law. Since the discussion is in the United States and in Washington centered, let me point out that actually the global pioneer in antitrust law is United States. Right from 1890, US has been sensitive to the fact that the free market is well and good, but if it's a free market with 1 million people competing on one side and 4 or 5 people on the other side, you don't have much of a market. It's completely one-sided. You need antitrust law to shore this up. Given that there was none of these accompanying features with the Indian farm laws, my fear is the way it is going to work is, yes, our production may go up, but the farmers in the end will be worse off. So what these laws are going to do is, yes, it may increase the total amount of production, but at the cost of the farmers is my view, because no attention is being paid to antitrust law. No attention is being paid to the fact that the minimum support price system is not really shored up by the law. So you can remove it and leave farmers free and open. Let me use just 2-3 minutes more on a subtle economic argument. Again, I'm taking advantage of the fact that I am discussing this with a group of economists. The freedom, giving people greater freedom, and the early viewpoint on this, since James Foster is here, I should emphasize, goes back to Derek Parfit in his philosophical writing. Giving people the freedom to choose. One step may be right. Second step may be right. But when you've taken n steps, you may end up hurting the very people to whom you've given this additional freedom. Transitivity is not always satisfied. And let me explain this with an example. Suppose you have a minimum wage law. It is very easy. You have to draw demand curve and supply curve and see if you have a minimum wage law, some unemployment will be created because you're holding the wage very high. When you remove that minimum wage law, depending on the nature of the demand and supply curve, you can have the wage plummeting so much that in the end, all the workers are worse off when you've given them this freedom. And this was recognized in the United States from an incidents which some people have written about. I think Peter Temin has written about it and others have written about it. This is in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, United States, Louisiana, the state of Louisiana enacted a law where people were given the freedom to become slaves. So you have the right to go and say that I want to become a slave. And the economics argument was, well, you're just giving people extra freedom, one more choice. And indeed, it is true, harsh though it may sound, giving one person that choice makes that person better off. You have your other choices plus one more choice. But it was realized that when you give a whole class of people that choice, you begin to play havoc with the wage rate, with prices, and in the end, these people can become worse off. So my view again on the farm laws is this. Broadly, we do need these changes. If you read these laws very quickly, you will be supportive. I was supportive. But when you look at it carefully and you look at the features around the law, the support for the farmers that are being worked out, and the fact that the laws were taken in with very little discussion has left me feeling that the farmers with their broad intuition got right with what we as economists with a quick look did not get it right. But I hope that as we look at it carefully, we will get it right, and we need to get back to the farm laws. India needs changes over here, but not these specific changes which have been brought in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was really informative. I think we're now going to move to Mahendra Dev to take the first slot as discussant of this, and then we'll move on, and then we'll come back to each panelist. And I do want to just remind people, if you joined late and you missed the introductions, I'm not going to repeat them now, but they're all available. The bios for all the speakers are on the website. And also, please, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll have time at the end where I'll try to pull some questions out of the Q&A to present to the panelists. So, Mahendra.
Okay. Thank you, Ajay and IIP for inviting me to this panel discussion. Good to have my teacher, Kaushik Basu, and my colleague, Sudha Narayanan as co-panelists. Ajay, I don't know which bucket I belong, but my position is that the agriculture reforms are important; they are needed, but there are concerns about these farm laws and whether central law is needed. Why can't we leave it to states? So that's my position. So I'll go through my presentation. So basically, I've given the benefits, concerns, and the way forward. So the need for agriculture market reforms is well known. 1991 reforms did not consider agriculture sector. So all the stakeholders have been advocating for agriculture market reforms due to several reasons. We know the reasons. APMC have not been efficient. There was also need for diversification from the higher incomes, and also important for environmental sustainability. And also the prices for farmers have been low due to inefficient supply chain. We need higher private investment needed in the supply chains. And more support for small and marginal farmers is also recognized as agrarian structure is changing. The agrarian structure, it was small and marginal farmers about 70% in 70-71, and it is 2015-16, it's about 86% small and marginal farmers. They're up to 2 hectares. And then their operated area increased, and then average size declined. In fact, marginal farmers is only 0.38 average size. So the shrinking size of farm is there. Next. What are the likely benefits? We all know the benefits of 3 farm laws: a greater choice to farmers, to realize better price. APMC Mandi system continues with taxes. And in the trade area, that is outside APMC, there are no taxes. So farmers get better prices, hopeful, that's the expectation. And also the expectation is that private investment in supply chains, like warehousing, storage, processing, will increase. And on contract farming, farmers can legally sign contracts with aggregators, processors, and to get higher incomes. And the amendment in EC Act, the Essential Commodities Act, attracts the corporate and foreign investment in food supply chains. Next. So these are the benefits. Is it the 1991 movement? Some people say that it's the 1991 movement, but it's not a completely new one, because there have been attempts to liberalize agriculture markets since 2003. We had Model APMC Act in NDA was by government 2003, and then UPA 2013, and 2017 under NDA again. But what is the difference? Earlier, central governments did only model acts, and they encouraged state government, they nudged the state governments to reform. So several state governments have reformed APMC laws. So this is a part of a continuous process and may not be a 1991 movement. So, but why there is so much attention now? Because the first time a central law has been brought on agriculture marketing relating to exchange, storage, taxation, and movement. Next. Next, please. Yeah. Beyond APMCs, another wrong impression created by some is that earlier farmers had to sell only to APMCs. In fact, only 25% of the transactions are done in APMC mandis. Of course, they have to get licenses and all from mandis. But even before the laws, 75% of the trade was done by private traders outside these mandis with regulation. Of course, there was a regulation outside mandis. So it's not that entire thing was in mandis only. So what are the issues and concerns on 3 farm laws? So one is whether central laws are necessary in a diverse country like India. Agriculture and marketing are state subjects, and the laws are also under attack for the free corporatization. That is one concern. There are two main concerns, as Kaushik also mentioned. One is the weakening of the existing MSP system, the minimum support system, and the dismantling of regulatory protection by allowing corporatization of markets, and which leads to disadvantages for small and marginal farmers. So first on MSP, next slide. Yeah, MSP. I was dealing with this when I was chairman of CICP, the Commission for Agriculture Costs and Prices. It recommends MSP for 23 crops: the Kharif crops, the summer one, and 14 crops: cereals, pulses, the oil seeds, and then Rabi crops, the 6 crops, the cereals and pulses and oil seeds. And then we have crops like sugarcane. So 23 crops MSP is given. The next. But as Kaushik also mentioned, rice and wheat procurement is done, but not for other crops. So if you see the share of the recently, the Punjab and other places, even Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh have substantial shares. So it's not that people are saying it's limited to Punjab, Haryana, particularly rice. It's not limited. There is also decentralized procurement, Chhattisgarh and other places. In fact, if you see the Madhya Pradesh with wheat, it is more than this year than Punjab, but they are limited to few states wheat. But rice, there is a decentralization. Next. So there is an impression that procurement is limited to Punjab, Haryana, and only large farmers benefit. But we have a decentralized procurement, particularly for rice, because many states have benefited. Smallholders also benefited. Not all smallholders, but some have benefited. And also, although rice and wheat is the procurement, but MSP acts as a reference price for other crops also, because in the market, for example, the cost of oil seeds, the pulses is this much. This is the MSP. So that acts as a reference. So the large farmers may be benefiting from that also. But of course, however, MSP covers only some crops, no MSP for fruits, vegetables, milk, and other things. So, but in spite of this limited thing, still large farmers benefit from this. And second, of course, the corporates dominate the unregulated markets in trade area by corporates. They can have form cartels and leads to collusion and uncertainty. Yeah, next, please. So fear is that APMC mandis will be weakened and may not survive because of the freedom given in the non-APMC thing. And then small and marginal farmers are in the hands of the corporates, which leads to unequal bargaining power. Yeah. So the private traders have been also using APMC price as a reference price. So what will happen if the mandis are weakened to this reference price? And also the experience of in other states also not been good, like Bihar has abolished in APMC in 2006, but its experience has not been good. And other issues are, some people say middlemen agents will go away with these reforms, but we have a this interlocked credit markets. The agents and other, they give credit to the farmers. So they have to sell it to the agents, the produce. So with that, middlemen agents also may not go. Even they act as aggregators, even with this new law. So one view is that also, if you want reforms, local markets and infrastructure have to be developed. That's a precondition, some people say. And farmers also want provision to go to court in contract farming that government is accepting, but this alone may not help because of unequal power. Next. So what should be done? My last point about this. First thing is, why can't we leave it to states? Because the dual control of marketing APMC by state government and trade area by central government may not work. So there could be turf war in different states. In fact, the laws have given unlimited powers for central government in trade area, that is non-APMC area. So is there any need for central law, which is one size fits for all policy? We know APMs are inefficient. There is a need for agri-market reforms. So my position is, why can't we leave it to states? Because in states have major role in cooperative federalism. Then we need to have infrastructure and institutions to help smallholders, because APMCs have to be strengthened, their institutional structure also, and also develop markets, local mandis as mentioned earlier, and collectives and cooperatives like Amul milk for smallholders, for collective bargaining, including women collectives. Next. And also we need farmer producer organizations to help the smallholders in both input and output markets and deal with the private sector. Because the farmer producer organization can have some bargaining power, and also need for information access and connectivity for smallholders so that better information they get. On MSP, of course, it should be continued, but stay with that thing, yeah. But more incentives for other crops like millets, pulses, and oil seeds for diversification of cropping pattern. One thing I don't agree with this view is the legalizing MSP, because there is a debate whether it is practicable, because the legalizing, this is a government MSP thing, so we can't impose on private sector for this legalizing MSP. And then regulatory infrastructure is needed in the trade area, because in the present laws there is no regulation, free corporatization to have a fair competition. Next, my last two slides. The need for diversification of cropping patterns in Punjab and Haryana away from rice and wheat is recognized because of several reasons: to reduce soil degradation and groundwater depletion. But the diversification has to be gradual. I mean, you can't, because the crops other than rice and wheat should get them higher incomes, and shifting the rice cultivation to Eastern India is better because they have more water, the groundwater and other water. And diversification in general is needed for higher incomes, to also to tackle climate change and environmental concerns. And last point is that 15th Finance Commission recommendations. It says it recommends 45,000 crores, about $6 billion for agriculture reforms. That includes land lease reforms, sustainable and efficient water use, and also for export promotion, and to grow more pulses and oil seeds, we can be more self-reliant. Yeah, last slide, please. Next. Yeah. Earlier, the 15th Finance Commission recommended contract farming and agriculture reforms, and also given incentives to adopt modern laws. But they have been removed, after the government recent farm laws in the 15th Finance Commission recommendations. Maybe we should have kept 15th Finance Commission recommendations than the hurriedly done 3 farm laws. So way forward is that to discuss with farmers and states, have laws to serve the interests of farmers by giving larger role to states. So I am for agriculture reforms. They are important. The farm reforms for including marketing, for transformation of Indian agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That was really informative. Let's move on to our final panelist now, Sudha Narayanan. And after that, we'll kind of return to each panelist for kind of brief remarks in response. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm really pleased to hear that my work is a source of information for Kaushik. I like to think that some of that wisdom in the articles are from him. So he having been my teacher and my PhD committee member. So with that, I'll get started on my presentation. I don't have slides, and I want to kind of talk about these farm laws and the farm protest via 5 key questions that have come up. Rather than discussing each law in significant detail, I want to kind of answer the broad questions that have come up in the debates. And like Professor Mahendra Dev, I'm not sure I am in any one bucket or the other. And in fact, I'm trying not to be in any single bucket. So what I'm going to share with you is my many years of field experience and as an observer of agri-food supply chains across the country. And I want to give you a perspective of some of the things that are currently going on, for which we don't have academic evidence, but these are events that we are witness to. And I will throw in a little bit of my opinion in as well. And I think it will be obvious to you which is opinion and which is a description of what's going on and what we have learned. So let me start with the first question, where everyone is asking, isn't this the reform that was sorely needed? And I want to say yes, but no. I remember in the first interview I gave after the farm laws, my first reaction to the farm laws is, be careful what you wish for, you might actually get it. And these 3 laws actually represent something like that. And I'll explain why this isn't the form of reform that we needed. First, in terms of constitutional framework, agriculture and markets and fairs are state subjects, and the center's role is relevant, but it's responsible for trade within the borders overall. So there is an issue that this has largely been the space of the states. The second thing is also how these laws were passed in Parliament. It was done via a voice vote, even though Parliament members were asking for a division of votes. So votes were not counted and it was done by a voice vote. So there are some questions about the validity, constitutional validity of these, and that's remained unresolved. So on the one hand, this is a state subject where the center has legislated, and so the manner in which it was done is somewhat less desirable in the context of a federal democratic country. Leaving that aside, we also need to see where we were. So as Professor Mahendra Dev had mentioned, a lot of progress, even though the agriculture market reform has happened very slowly, and different states have done reform at very uneven paces. Some were early reformers, some have been quite slow. I think it's important to know where we stand so that we understand the incremental change that these reforms bring. And there actually, the news is not very encouraging in the sense that if you look at the progress made, you wonder if these acts were necessary at all. For example, I would like to add and deepen a little bit of discussion on the APMC that Kaushik had started off. The old APMC acts essentially said the APMR, which is the Agriculture Produce Marketing Regulations, will have a committee which has farmers' representatives, traders, commission agents, and members of the government. And they will be in charge of market areas, which are broad geographic areas where production happens. And in the old version of the Act, the first transaction between farmer and the first buyer should happen only in designated market yards, which were physical spaces, and we call those mandis. And you paid a fee for the use of the yard. Now, over time, the control of the APMC was not restricted to the yard, but in the original version, they were in charge of the entire market area. So whatever happened in the market area was under the jurisdiction of these APMCs. Now, over time, there were problems. Why? Because the APMC actually embodied both regulatory functions as well as operational functions. So they were empowered to issue licenses to who could operate within the APMC. They also kind of resolved disputes. So there was a fusing of functions, and this was abused because they could keep out traders and new entrants because they had the power to license. The other issue was that even if I didn't use the market yard and I was selling produce outside, I would have to pay a fee to the mandi, which didn't seem logical if I were not using the premises at all. So it was something like a tax for which I was not getting a corresponding service, right? So it was like a tax. Now, over years, these have been well recognized, and there have been many committees, and the reform that has been done are fairly deep across states. Now, even during the COVID crisis, as many as 12 states substantially reformed their laws. So today, if you look at the current status before these laws were passed, you'll see that private direct procurement, contract farming, farmers markets, direct selling to consumers were all possible under the new reforms. Many states also declared warehouses as market yards so that direct selling from warehouses could take place. Since 2014, fruits and vegetables were completely removed from the APMC's jurisdiction so that you could just freely transact in horticulture. And in many states, farmer producers organizations was exempt from fees. And these fees are about, roughly between 0.5% and 2.5%, with Punjab being the exception with up to 8% of mandi fees. So this is where we were. So essentially, in terms of the incremental benefit of these acts, it isn't as if that it's allowed private trade where previously private trade wasn't possible. It does two things. It reduces the entry barriers because now you don't need a license, and it reduces the transactions cost of procuring because you now don't have to pay a mandi fee. The problem with this is now, whereas the market area was under state control or the APMC's control, now there's a creation of a trade area which comes under the center. So you're kind of fragmenting the system a little bit into something that comes under the APMC and something that doesn't. And the problem is that what happens in the trade area is completely invisible because there is no recording of trade prices or stocks. And apart from which it fragments markets in the sense that if I'm operating in one state, then I now face different laws for where APMCs are and the outside APMC in the trade area. And different states continue to have their APMC jurisdiction. So it kind of complicates markets and the regulatory structure rather than unifying, which was what was intended. One perverse consequences is that there are states such as Kerala and Bihar that had no law, APMC law at all. So essentially the entire trade was free. They suddenly come under the central jurisdiction. They become a trade area and the rules that govern the trade area begin to apply to them, completely undermining states' oversight on any activity. So this is one of the perverse consequences. And I also want to mention poor dispute resolution in the trade area. There are some really unique problems. Recently in Madhya Pradesh, there was a trader who apparently didn't pay the farmers and disappeared. But the dispute resolution in the new act says that there must be a board of conciliation, which has representatives selected by the trader and by the farmer. And there the subdivisional magistrate was at a loss because had run away. So it was actually a very poorly drafted act if you read it. And there are many small issues like that that are cropping up right now. And in fact, many are relieved that it's on hold at the moment. The second question, so the first was, isn't this the reform that was solely needed? Perhaps not, because we were doing quite well anyway. We were going slow, but there are merits to gradualism and learning from different states, their experiences. So the second question is, will farmers not benefit from more choice and competition? I think that's something Kaushik already mentioned. I believe there is substantial scope for gains for many farmers in this context. Yes, there might be more choice and competition. One of the disappointments I have as a researcher is we'll never know because we don't even have anything recorded in those trade areas to even assess whether there has been a difference. So leaving that apart, there is a problem of distributional implications that more choice and competition is not going to happen everywhere. Businesses are very selective in where they operate. And very often what you see is in the short term, farmers will face multiple options. And very soon there will be a shake-up and they are left with just one buyer. And so monopsonies happen, collusion happens locally, and these are things we have to watch out for. I do believe there's a huge scope of these laws for farmer producers organizations, especially in states where they weren't granted exemptions. And there is also going to be a lot of ag tech startups. There I have to also caution that a lot of the ag tech firms are not in it because commodity trading gives them margins. It's because the commodity platforms and e-platforms that they run can also be leveraged to sell fintech products and services. So if you look at the interest rates charged through these small sachet loans that ag tech startups are giving, they are equivalent to what the money lender would charge locally. So, which of course is hard to pry out from ag tech companies, but that's essentially the business proposition for them, where it's kind of paired or dovetail with commodity transactions. The other benefit from them for them is data monetization. So essentially what they value is not so much the margins they get from moving commodities along supply chains, but the data that's harvested and monetized in terms of a credit score and so on. So I think we need to watch this space to see how this whole deregulation will pan out. The third question is the threat of consolidation real? Now, India produces over 300 million tons of horticulture crops. And for us to imagine that any one company can control a large share of this it's inconceivable, because India is so diverse, there are so many challenges, farmers are so small, that consolidating in the commodity trading space is not easy. Many have tried, including some really big grocery retailers, and they have failed. However, there is a threat of consolidation locally. So for example, even as we speak, 15% of the apple markets in Himachal Pradesh is cornered by one big company, and they control virtually the entire apple distribution in Bihar. And that could happen. So today we have a situation where apple prices in the mandis, in the APMC markets, are actually taking cues from what the industrialist sets. So the big business sets an apple price, and that is followed by the APMC. And we'd hope that it would be the reverse, so that APMCs would be a kind of a benchmark of a fair price. And that's not what is happening. So there are dangers we see locally of consolidation, but there is a greater danger that is coming from this free trade area. Now, and that's what somebody like Professor Jean Drez had written. He called it DRAMA, Dual Regulation of Agricultural Markets Act. And with some creativity, you can call it trauma, where actually it's what is happening is that when you create this space, this extra space, which is completely under the control of the center, we need to understand what the center plans to do with it. And in their documents, vision documents for doubling farmers' income, you see this vision of building agri-data stacks and farmer stacks, and opening up the e-platforms and data sharing, which has farm data, farmer data, Aadhaar card, which is a unique ID, and allowing public-private partnerships. Now, there is no sense of what this is going to look like, but we do see in the recent past that agriculture has become, and food grocery retail has become very safe avenue for investments, as have logistics of agri-food supply chains. So the two firms that have been targeted by farmers' protests, one of them has entered very aggressively into the food retail space, while also having an app for farmers with the aim of controlling the supply chains, and they are quite explicit about it. And the other controls airports, railway cargo, as well as storage and food storage and food grain storage. And in fact, the Food Corporation of India annual report of 2018-19 says that the FCI land that was supposed to have storage facilities has been entrusted to this company on a 30-year lease with guaranteed returns. And I think these kind of consolidation that are not directly in the commodity trading sector, but in all the ancillary via data consolidation and via supply chain logistics is a real threat. I do not think that we have a threat where one firm controls 80% of agricultural trade at the point of first sale. The fourth question, and I'm not far from finishing, is will the APMC markets die out? My short answer to that is possibly. In the beginning, I thought that it would not die out because it's kind of exaggerated fears, because as long as many farmers depend on the APMC market, it will continue to be a backbone. There is another view that the efficient APMC markets will flourish, but the others won't. But what we are seeing today is many state governments have already reformed their agricultural marketing laws and have reduced mandi fees to zero. Now, if you reduce mandi fees to zero, or it's very minimal, then actually there is no revenue being generated. And we are seeing two examples. For example, Jharkhand, which has done everything right in market reform, now no longer has funds of its own to invest. So essentially what they are trying to do is to go for a PPP model where the APMC market yard itself will have a private player leasing land. What it implies for regulation is secondary. I have no idea what will happen. But essentially, you are handing over an APMC market yard to a private player. And questions are there, of course, who that private is. If they hand it over to local FPOs, that has a different set of outcomes. If it's going to big business, it's going to have a different implication. Likewise, we hear news from Karnataka. This is just hearsay. That many mandis in Karnataka have had to reduce staff by 50% because many people who had licenses have now turned that in and have switched to working outside the mandis. Now, if this happens, then it is possible that over the long run, even the efficient APMC markets might die out. This is again something we need to watch. Then finally, why are farmers protesting? Farmers are, as Kaushik rightly said, many of us believe that they have a more incisive understanding of many of these issues than we do. But they are not protesting just the farm laws. In fact, some people believe that it is they're protesting against everything that's happened, including demonetization and lockdown. Now, I don't know for sure. I've not spoken to many farmers. But at the same time, it's more than just the farm laws. It's about minimum support prices. It's about punishments and penalties associated with stubble burning. It's about electricity bills. And it's about a whole range of other reforms that are essential for to tackle the unfortunate legacies of the Green Revolution areas. And here there is an interesting question. Between the MSP, legalizing MSP and repeal of farm laws have been their two main demands. And it's interesting to see which one matters more for the farmers. And personally, I believe if you repeal the farm laws, we may not lose very much. But going in for a legalizing an MSP and doing that, I think would have devastating consequences environmentally as well as fiscally. It would also drive the small traders out. So I don't even think it's in the interest of small farmers. So with that, in terms of the way forward, I would believe that repealing the laws is actually a sensible thing to do. And a way to, you don't even have to get back to the drawing board. The train was already on its tracks. You just let it go the way it was. I do believe in gradualism and learning from incremental changes that teaches a lot more than this master stroke of a reform. Now, how that can be achieved is a larger set of issues, which I won't go into, but I'll stop here with thanking you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So at this point, I think we'll return to each panelist for just a shorter stint, maybe 5 minutes, just any reactions to what you've heard from your fellow panelists or anything that you feel the need to add, and we'll just go in the same order. And then as soon as we're done with that, we'll turn to questions. And I should tell you, there are a lot of great questions. So if you don't have a ton to add, feel free to just cede the time back and we'll dive into all these questions. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Kaushik.
Thank you, Jay. Do you hear me? You will see me soon. I'm sure it's happening with a lag. If you can hear me, I'll begin to talk.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. So, no, this is just very, very useful. Thank you, Mahendra and Sudha. I have to say, it is, for the organizers, this may be disappointing because we seem to be roughly on the same side. I mean, there are nuanced differences, but let me just emphasize one or two things where I may have left things unclear, where actually I stand completely with the line that Sudha's taking and Mahendra's taking. Not for a moment would I go for legalizing MSP. Apart from anything else, I don't even quite know what legalizing would mean. What price do you fix in advance? Do you create a law that this is the way the price is going to be fixed? MSP gives you space and freedom, and you want that to be intelligently used. You don't want that to be enshrined in a law. And that is where the part that I was emphasizing, and I think it's also coming out from what Mahendra says and Sudha says, trust is very important. If it's not in the law, then, and it can't be in the law, and no second thoughts on that, how much people trust that this is being done in the interest of the farmer is very important. And that trust, given the smoking gun evidence from a variety of ways, the trust is very low. I want to give you just examples from other countries of seemingly right moves which have backfired. One is labor laws, since I mentioned first, I don't know if too many people know India's labor law, the most disputed labor law, the Industrial Disputes Act, which makes the labor market very inflexible, goes back to before independence in 1947. It's a 1947 act, but before independence. So Pakistan and India was born with the same law. Pakistan revoked it in 1958. And at first sight, all liberal economists, and if I was old enough to understand economics in 1958, I would have been on the same side, would have supported it, that it is doing the right thing. But if you look at the way Pakistan got rid of the law, it was the right direction move, very badly executed. In the end, the labor market was decimated in Pakistan. Few big groups captured the space, and really it hurt the Pakistan economy in an enormous way. So broadly move in the right direction, wrongly done, devastating. The other example is not of a wrong move, but United States, since we are talking over here, there are now prominent legal law and economic scholars, and I'm thinking of names like Glenn Weil, Suresh Naidu, Eric Posner, Cass Sunstein. They are pointing out that our antitrust laws in the past have been obsessed with consumer protection. But as we get these mega platforms who are buying from hundreds and thousands of retailers, not buying, creating a space for the retailers to come on board, you have to think of the monopsony side. The workers, how they face up to the big corporations. The small retailers, how they face up to the big platforms. And you have to bring in antitrust kind of law over there. In India, just absolutely no thought has been given. So on the whole, the sort of line that Sudha was taking towards the end, that broadly the right direction, it was, the changes are taking place, and we do want reforms in this sector, but reforms where you have to have very fine discussion, because a seemingly right step can turn out to be a very wrong step. Let me stop with that, and depending on Q&As, I'll come back.
Great. Now I'll turn it back to Mahendra.
Yeah, like Kaushik, probably it's a disappointment that we are on the same pace. Maybe we should have called one person who supports fully the farm laws. So coming to three laws. The first law, the trade area and the APMC area. There are problems, the dual structure, as John has put it, drama. So that is going to be a severe problem across states and the center. And because earlier we have been supporting APMC market reforms, because there is lot of problems. There are a lot of problems in the APMC system. The politicization of the APMCs. And so we were supporting this APMC, the market reforms, but that was more modal laws by central government, but the state governments were doing these reforms. So one can continue those kind of things and leave it to the states. And the second, the related one, of course, as three of us said, legalizing MSP is going to be a problem, because the MSP, even earlier, it was not a legal one. So we need to be careful in that legalizing MSP thing. On contract farming, even earlier we had this contract farming in many states thing, but there are the benefits and some good case studies which have done very well in contract farming, but there are also exploitative systems in contract farming. Even if you see India and other countries' experiences in Africa or other countries, the experience on contract farming shows that it's a mixed record, that some very good examples are there. And lastly, one or two things on institutions are important, because particularly for small and marginal farmers, how do you, the cooperative kind of thing is needed to face the unequal bargaining power. And on the last one, Essential Commodities Act also we were supporting earlier that it should be, we should amend that because it is coming in the way of the private investment and all. But again, this inconsistent of the government policies, they're having amendment in this ECA, but there are also export bans in onions and all, which is not a consistent policy. So EC Act, whether it helps the farmers or not, we have to see. So in conclusion, I stick to my thing that whether these three laws are necessary by the center, the reforms are important. From the Punjab, Haryana also, there is a need for diversification of cropping pattern from the environment point of view or sustainability point of view. And also, we have to go beyond marketing. Of course, there is a need for reforms in other things, land legalizing land tenures and the technology, water management. All those issues are equally important. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let me turn it back then to Sudha.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add a little bit or respond to Kaushik's thinking on MSP. And I think India has been at the crossroads for a very long time, in the sense that most countries have switched away from price-based support to income support. And I think you see the beginnings of many experiments at the state level in giving direct transfers to farmers. And we have a scheme that's pan-India as well called PM Kisan. And I think if we had that option work well, I think getting away from an MSP kind of regime would be easier. Unfortunately, we've never, in India, we've not yet defined who a farmer is. So in fact, if you look at the Doubling Farmers Income document, the preface would define farmer as one who has land. And in the first chapter that a consultant or somebody, an academic has written, you'll find that they insist that land ownership should not be a criterion. So I think some of these issues with identifying people being difficult because of so much tenancy and informal land leasing, we have a problem that we are stuck with a price-based support regime. But the question then becomes, how do you do it well? And I think there's been a lot of discussion, including with some farmers groups who I think are quite annoyed that I'm against legalizing MSP. But I think the idea is you want a signal from the government on benchmarking prices. I did a study on HOPCOMS, which is a Horticulture Marketing Cooperative Society in Karnataka, where just HOPCOMS announcing the prices, they had procured only 6% of what was in the market, and it was financially viable. So they retailed it and they made the money. It was not loss making. But just their announcement would align or discipline market prices. So we don't necessarily have to think of physical procurement of 30%, 45% of the grain like we do now. But you can easily have interventions that are diverse, geographically dispersed, various commodities, but in a way in which the government's announcement gives a kind of benchmark price. And in fact, there were a lot of discussions that such procurement could move to commodity exchanges, which then becomes the lead signal giver for spot markets across. So a number of options are possible without necessarily saddling ourselves with another system that we can't undo years from now. But I think, as I said, the MSP discussion is so complex that it needs a great care and attention to detail and huge buy-in from all the states and different interests. But for now, I think, and that's one of the reasons I say that let go of the MSP, but repeal the laws if that's what will persuade farmers to go home.
Great, thank you for that. So at this point, I'm going to start to pull some of the questions that have been posed from the audience, and I'll pose them to the panel broadly unless it's a question that seems to specifically have been asked towards one of you. I think one question that came in, I think is somewhat fundamental to the conversation all three of you put forward, which was the person asked, why is it that there seems to be an assumption that monopsony will prevail here? That why it seems like all three of you are coming from a perspective, and if not, maybe go ahead and chime in, but that competition won't necessarily work here, and that the small farmers will, in some sense, invariably be pushed up against a kind of monopsonistic buyer in the new system. And so is that the assumption all three of you are coming from? Because it seemed like that was one of the concerns of what would happen to the small farmer. So I maybe on this one, since I think actually maybe Sudha, you spoke briefly about your concern about how you wouldn't see a national single buyer type, but that within a product, within a market, you might. So I don't know if you have additional thoughts there.
Yeah, so I'm not assuming that one monopsony will be what prevails. I have seen a lot of clusters where in the same village you have 3 or 4 people procuring, and their prices, if you look at the distribution of prices, they're competing with each other, and it keeps it up. At the same time, I think from a larger perspective, we have to understand that the Indian landholding size is really small. The average size, 86% have owned less than 2 hectares, and very often it's much smaller. And supposing I'm contracting for a crop, it's not as if all smallholders grow only one single crop. So they diversify even within the small holdings. So ultimately, even to get any volume that makes sense to come to the village and procure, you need to contract or work with a large number of farmers. Now, very often there is no room left in the local areas or villages for many players. And if at all there are many players, they'll themselves be small traders who can't scale up. And if they are small traders, then they usually carve up territories and say, even though they are fluid and farmers have choice, it's not as if, it's not like a commodity exchange where I can, the whole national market is open to me and prices are bid up. So that's my concern. The smallholder farmer, high transactions costs of working with small farmers means that you will likely have monopsonistic conditions. I'd love to be proven wrong, but that's what I'm seeing on the ground.
Kaushik or Mahendra, anything you'd like to add to that question?
I do want to add something, Jay, something very similar to what Sudha's saying. The question was that, am I assuming? I'm actually not assuming, I'm predicting. And I'm predicting not quite monopsony. Monopsony suggests like one buyer, but oligopsony. A few buyers dominating the market is close to certain unless you take a lot of precautions against this. This we've seen time and again, and for reasons of the kind that Sudha is giving, multiple small farmers trying to sell, and the economies of scale of big buyers, you are buying over large areas, you will soon see the domination by a few big buyers, as examples were given from the Apple market to other markets. That is what will happen. And the way the laws are being changed right now, no sensitivity is shown to prevent this oligopsonization of the market taking place. So my prediction is, if we go the route that we are going, it will be an oligopsony market with a few big players dominating and playing against millions of farmers.
My view is that, some people are saying in the retail sector, many big players may not come because they have, separate markets like export markets and all, where the competition with the traditional one may not be there and all. But my view is that, as both of them mentioned, that it is possible that, several players, some players can have monopoly or oligopoly kind of thing with using the middlemen, the agents, for aggregation and those things. So it is possible with this present law. That's what I feel.
Thank you. Another question that I think maybe is a good one to start with, because it's something of a fundamental one, is the person wrote in that they felt like all three of you were very much framing this around questions of the impact on farmers, with less emphasis on the impact on consumers. And I'm just curious if you have a thought on that, of what would this do to food prices, not that the farmer is getting to sell at, but the food prices that people are able to buy at. Kaushik, do you want to start?
I can jump in. Yeah, I think it's a more mixed what will happen there. Two possibilities, that the gap between what the consumers are paying and what the farmers are getting could increase, which is going to increase the profit of the middle person, but may not also happen. If the total size of the cake grows, the consumers may get some benefit out of it. But the basic thing that I'm expecting that will happen from this is actually the cake will probably grow, the total amount that is there, but the disproportionate amount of this is going to go to the middle, the corporations handling the middle of it. From the farmers to the consumers, this gap is going to go into a few pockets. So it is like in many situations, and that is the problem of monopoly and monopsony that we talk about, that at times it can lead to an expansion in the total amount of activity, but the profit goes disproportionately into a few pockets. Farmers, I think, will be worse off, very, very likely. Consumers, it's more mixed. The one group that will benefit is this middle group that is going to reach out between the two segments.
Sudha or Mahendra, anything to add?
Yeah, it can affect both the farmers and the consumers. In fact, even now, the farmers are getting less and the consumers are, are paying more. For example, the tomato prices, the farmers are getting, 1 rupee per 1 kg, 1 kilogram. Whereas, consumers are paying 40 rupees per kilogram. So there is a, supply chain inefficiencies are there. But with these reforms, it is possible that, consumers also get affected because of this monopoly or oligopoly kind of things. But in general, I am in favor of, more prices for farmers. And then consumers, you can have systems like particularly the poor and all, the PDS kind of system, instead of having low prices for farmers.
Yeah, I'm happy to go last because it gave me a little bit of time to think through this very complex issue. And I think what happens at the retail end in this agri-food supply chains is going to matter a lot. 20 years ago, people were predicting that the supermarket retail revolution has happened in India, and small roadside vendors and street vendors are going to disappear, and mom and pop stores will go out of business. We've not seen that happen. We've seen considerable resilience. And so in that sense, I do believe that even if it doesn't, at the retail end, even if it doesn't go into the hands of a few players, I think that there is going to be pressure to keep consumer prices down. And the only way they can keep it down and be profitable and stay in business is to push the costs onto upstream on the supply chain. This is true not only of vendors and mom and pop stores, but also big online grocery retailers. I think when Reliance Jio came on to sell online grocery, they just announced that we are going to give it 5%, everything 5% less than MRP. So I think those with deep pockets can really attract consumers and keep them loyal by pushing down prices. And to some extent, they can make more efficient supply chains and make up their margins with that. But at some point of time, if they have to constantly keep consumer prices down, they'll have to push back and push farmer prices down. And in fact, that's probably what you see in countries where grocery retail has consolidated heavily. You see that the farmer's share in total price that the consumer pays is quite low. I think the marketing bill, if you look at the marketing bill in the US produced by the USDA, there are different methods to compute this, but I think it's 14.8 cents to $1. And right now in India, it's much higher. And in fact, many conversations with international players in grocery retail, they often tell me that the Indian market is hyper efficient right now. So which suggests that farmers are actually getting a higher price share of the consumer rupee than you would expect. In terms of levels, I think as long as there's competition at the retail end, you're not going to see consumer prices rise too much. I think the burden will fall on the farmer.
Another question connected to these topics is, and this is, Kaushik, something you brought up in your second round comment, which is Indian antitrust law in any way prepared to handle a challenge like this of kind of monopsony or oligopsony power? And I just referenced from the United States case where there really is a concern that if courts apply always a consumer welfare standard, then the concerns of the small farmer, small business, et cetera, or worker wind up not bearing much weight in decisions around antitrust. So is this something that Indian antitrust law would even consider in some sense? And a second question that came from the audience is it a competition problem, or is it also a corruption problem that's taking place here? And again, is the government prepared in any way to handle that side?
The corruption is a more general problem, and it is not also that by bringing in a new law, you improve it, because that law can become a source of corruption. So I'm not really going into that, but let me take on the antitrust. Is Indian law prepared for this kind of antitrust action? Here, Jay, the answer is it's not prepared in the same way that the United States antitrust law is not prepared for what's happening because of big tech and these digital platforms. But in the US, you're seeing a sensitivity to that, a huge amount of debate, with some people saying that there are prominent writers like Lina Khan and others, legal scholars, arguing that the antitrust law ought to be used more effectively. But there are others saying that, look, this concern should make us think now of novel ways of regulating the market, because with the large economies of scale, the old-fashioned antitrust law of 1890 does not apply adequately. But it's this awareness. What has happened in India is when these farm laws came in, you did not even see this awareness. Right now, I have to say, as you can see from this discussion, all of us are sensitive to this. And actually, most good economists I talk to concerning the Indian situation, they have become sensitive to it. But there wasn't enough of that. So I don't think, frankly, the antitrust alone will be able to do it. But awareness of antitrust on the buyer's side, where it's big buyers facing small retailers or workers, that awareness is important. I'm not very clear whether we will solve that problem through the antitrust law or through that awareness. We are going to go for better and more sophisticated regulation. And the corruption problem, I don't want to minimize. When I was in government, I've written prominently on this and got into debates and discussions. It's a huge topic, but it's another topic.
Great. Mahendra or Sudha?
Yeah, I mean, the antitrust law, it is, I mean, we have a competition commission and all, they do for many other things, manufacturing and other. But the antitrust law, maybe one can try, but then I feel the regulatory infrastructure is important in the trade area, because of this, the monopsony or oligopsony kind of thing, whether we have the antitrust law or something. And then again, another, the bureaucratic corruption kind of things. So one has to see over time.
Yeah, I think the Competition Commission has had several interesting works relating to agriculture, especially oligopsony in seed and monopoly rights over seed and things like that. It's also done very interesting reports to look at manipulation of markets by traders, when onion prices went up. So you do see a very proactive and intervention by Competition Commission of India, but I think it has very limited capacity to regulate things at the point of first sale, which is essentially a small farmer facing possibly a monopsonistic or oligopsonistic market. There, I do not think it's possible to have, I think we just need to create market structures that don't become that. I don't think it's possible or desirable to regulate at that level of detail. And I doubt India will ever have that capacity to go that far. So I'll stop there, yeah.
Great. I wanted to ask a different type of question, moving away from the competition questions, one that came in from the chat, thinking more about how these laws might interact with concerns around the environment. And I think, Mahendra, you spoke briefly about the question of where rice was being grown and if there was some way to shift where in the country it was being grown because of strains on water. And I guess that is the question. So if agricultural laws are being rewritten in India, is anything here, is would these new laws kind of make the strains on resources worse? Would they improve them, or is it just they weren't really considered here?
I mean, those who are supporting completely the laws say that there will be a diversification of crops because of these laws, and also, I mean, particularly Punjab, Haryana, because of this groundwater depletion, soil degradation. They think, but I feel that MSP is going to stay, whether you like it or not, for next decade or so. I mean, as Sudha mentioned, the cash transfers, I also agree, but it's not either or. I think both may stay, the MSP as well as the PM Kisan and all. So whether the diversification will happen in Punjab, Haryana particularly, you have to have give them some time for diversification. How do you give incentives for other crops? As Kaushik mentioned, even MSP within that, suppose you give more to them, but you also need, for example, fruits and vegetables. You need a marketing infrastructure, because when I was the chairman of CSCP, I used to go to Punjab. They say that rice and wheat are the best for us. The profits for getting. So unless you show them the other non-rice and wheat alternatives, it is difficult to have diversification.
So I think the farm laws, there are ingredients that could push us in both directions. I don't work on environment that much, but this just comes from what I'm seeing and I've seen through my research. With contract farming, there's a real risk that it has disastrous environmental consequences. Because they are contracting with farmers and are not wedded to the land. In some sense, they don't care that much about sustainability unless they have huge fixed investments in terms of processing plants. Without that, they are free to move around. And in fact, the gherkins cluster in southern India is a good example of how in any given geography, they contract for 5 years, they find the soil quality goes down because of excessive use of pesticides and chemicals, and they move to another cluster. And it's happened so much that actually paddy yields on plots that grow gherkins for 2 years actually are half of what it used to be before. So I think contract farming can actually encourage irresponsible contracting. And I think that danger is there. But with the entry of agtech players, I think it's less clear what will happen. On the one hand, many agtech players are using artificial intelligence, working with soil sensors, and really going down to the detail to see if natural resources are managed well. That is their business, right? So, and there I see potential for a lot of positive impacts, given that they are committed to the farmer and those resources in the long term. But there is a flip side, which increasingly data scientists are alerting me to, which is that AI technologies and data consolidation and data platforms are not very well suited to do fields which have a lot of intercropping and high cropping diversity within the same farm. So they tend to work better for monocultures. And so there is a fear that as data kind of makes progress within the agriculture sector, it's also going to promote monocultures, which is not the direction we want to go to. What will happen, we don't know yet.
Jay, can I just add a word to it? This is also not really my field, but I was actually going to say something which Sudha virtually took words out of my mouth on the contract farming bit. It does worry me. We have evidence that a lot of it is scorch and move. I mean, you overuse scorch and then you move elsewhere. And so if you look at these laws, they may contribute a little bit towards this, but the environment is not something which was central in the concerns of the way the law was done. And people very often do get upset with farmers that look what's happening to our skies and all. Yes, farming is doing it, but farmers are too small players for them individually to take action to change this. We need on this, not these laws, but really a very major effort Sit down, get all the data, think how you can change the regulatory norms so that the environment does not continue to get damaged in the way it is getting damaged. And it is not something that an individual farmer can say that I'm going to change and improve. That won't happen. You need to create laws, but these are separate laws. And this is really an urgent problem for India.
Thank you. We are, I believe, now at this point out of time, which is unfortunately. There are a number of great questions in the chat. I thank people for contributing them. I most of all, though, want to thank our panelists. This was a terrific conversation. I can say certainly I learned a lot from it. Ajay, I didn't know, do you have any closing words you'd like to add?
Just a quick thank you to all. I mean, I didn't see the 3 buckets, but I think I saw 1.5 buckets, but the richness and the texture of the discussion within that 1.5 bucket was really a treat. You know, just to say, having worked in many middle-income countries around the world, I think, Sudha, your point is right that eventually we will have to move away from these product and specific input-based subsidies to an income-based subsidy system. And by the way, given all the problems you mentioned about land and who's the farmer, in the countries in which it has been done, there is now fully evaluated evidence of huge improvements in land titling and therefore in productivity. So I think that's the direction in which maybe Mahendra is right. It won't happen for the next 10 years, but I think that's the direction in which India will eventually have to go. And also that all the problems that we are seeing in the farm sector cannot be solved, or farmers cannot be solved in the farm sector alone, because we have missed that boat on moving a lot of people out of farming. But within that context, let me thank you and for that hugely rich discussion that we have just had. And I think it was just the tip of the iceberg of the knowledge that the 3 of you have. Thank you so much.
So on behalf of IIEP, thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day or good night for those of you, depending where you are around the world. Thank you.